Alrighty, and we are back. This is College Football Podcast, I believe number 9. I'm pretty sure it's number 9, but I'm not exactly sure. I'm filming this right now, obviously, and so when I edit it in quotations, process it, and upload it, I'll figure out if it was actually number 9, but I believe it's number 9. We got a good one for y'all today. I know my last one, I personally thought the last podcast was my best podcast so far, which I know is not saying much, being that my other ones have probably been incredibly boring and not really worth listening to. But I did feel like at least that one was a little bit smoother, a little bit more fluid, had some good talking points, especially the story at the very end. And it seemed like y'all or a few of y'all liked those podcasts, some of the ones I heard back from, which I was happy to hear. And I'm glad to keep doing them for you, and I appreciate y'all tuning in here. So on tap for today, we're going to talk about the ACC first. We're going to talk about Clemson, Notre Dame, UNC. And then we're going to move into the SEC, and we're going to talk about Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. And then we're going to round off the end of the podcast with Ohio State and Michigan. And we'll talk about each one of these teams and how they work their way into the college football playoff race, what the college football playoff race may look like at the end of the year, and how all of this is going to unfold, because if there's anything we know as college football fans is college football is one of the most unpredictable sports out there. You never know what's going to happen. Any one of these teams could fall on any given day, which we about saw on Saturday, but more on that to come. And that's why we love the sport. You know, nothing is concrete, nothing is set in stone. Anything can happen on any given weekend, and that's something to respect about the sport, but also acknowledge and prepare your team in such a way that it doesn't happen to you. So with that, let's dive into the ACC. As I hinted at earlier, Clemson undoubtedly had a scare against Boston College. There's no other way to say it. It was a weird win. Obviously, there were a lot of weird things that happened during the week, with notably Trevor Lawrence testing positive for coronavirus. He also will not be able to go in the Notre Dame game. He will be able to travel perhaps, but the problem is with the protocol, he will not be up to speed to play in that game. However, and I will talk about this in a different podcast episode, I do not think that kills Clemson's offense. And actually, I know this sounds crazy. And I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, but it may help Clemson's offense. I know that sounds insane. You're probably thinking, how in the world could that be the case? What are you thinking? You've got the number one player in college football and probably the number one pick in the draft on your team, and you're telling me that helps your offense to lose him? It helps in a small way that translates a lot down the road. If you look, and I'm going to talk about this in another podcast episode ad nauseum during the week, but I'm just going to give you a short snippet here. Clemson's offense on Saturday was not the issue at all. DJ Uiagalelei played incredibly well, going 30 of 41, 342 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Etienne had 20 carries for 84 yards, but he also played a huge role in the passing game. And so I think when you have Lawrence, and obviously he is an incredible thrower. I mean, seriously, one of the best throwers I've ever seen in my life. Clemson sometimes gets a little too reliant on the pass. We run routes that take a long time to develop, and it oftentimes you can get stagnated. When we don't have Lawrence in, and you put DJ in there, you get quicker passes. You sometimes get him downfield, but you get quicker passes, and you activate Etienne in the pass game as well. And I think that is huge for multiple reasons. One, Clemson does not have a ton of wide receiver experience. Obviously, T. Higgins going to the NFL, Justin Ross being out due to the congenital neck injury that he has, / spine injury. Amari Rodgers is really your step-up wide receiver, and he's, at best, he's a good wide receiver, there's no doubt about that, but his position is a slot receiver. He's not built to be the number one wide receiver on the edge that you can go to every single time that you need. When you need a play, you go to him. That was Higgins last year. That would have been Ross this year. But obviously with those injuries and the departure to the NFL, you don't get that. So you got Amari Rodgers who's on one end, who's a slot receiver. You got Cornell Powell, who's been a backup his entire life at Clemson, his entire career. Senior wide receiver. He also played amazing. on Saturday and really helped DJ settle into the game. And other than that, you got Spector, who's a small, now playing the slot receiver. So you don't have a ton of weapons. Certainly not the amount of wide receiver weapons you normally have at Clemson that you would expect. And we see that here when you look at the stats. Travis Etienne was not only the Tigers' leading rusher, he was also the leading pass catcher with 7 receptions, going for 140 yards in 1 touchdown. Activating Etienne in the pass game is monumental to the team's success down the road, especially with this stiff challenge coming up against Notre Dame. But more on that in this week. But just a couple overall notes about the Clemson game. Yes, it was a scare. Every problem that Clemson had on Saturday can be corrected, and I fully expect will be corrected. The vast majority of problems were on defense. And by the way, when Clemson went into halftime, in that second half, Boston College was held under to 80 yards and did not score 1 point in the second half. So everyone freaking out, talking about how bad Clemson is, and I'll admit, the game should not have been as close as it was. I would not be mad at all if someone has Ohio State or Alabama, or heck, even both above Clemson in the polls. I would have no issue with that because I think that is certainly justified with the performance on Saturday. But everyone jumping ship and thinking Clemson's going to lose to Notre Dame and miss the playoff all of a sudden, well, that could happen. And I'm not going to completely rule that out because who knows what's going to happen with Lawrence and all this. You guys got to realize that Clemson played one bad half of football, went to halftime, made adjustments, came out, and dominated the second half. Absolutely dominated. The only reason why it didn't reflect on the scoreboard was because we shot ourselves in the foot. But Boston College virtually did nothing in the second half. Granted, they had a couple possessions where they could have taken the lead or heck even probably won the game, but all of those were predicated on the points scored in the first half. There was no consistent ball movement from Boston College in the second half, and nor should there have been. Now, granted, Boston College is not a horrible team by any stretch of the means. Boston College is 4-2 right now. They'll probably end up getting to 6 wins. Hafley's done a great job in his first year at BC. Now, granted, should they be competing with the number 1 team in the country? Absolutely not. No way. Clemson should have come out and won this game by 40 points. But you know what? When you lose your quarterback and you lose your starting linebacker and you lose a starter on the defensive line and you lose a starter at linebacker and you have multiple injuries in the secondary in positions where Clemson likes to rotate players, and you have injuries in your running backs and injuries in your tight ends, not to mention you're missing your star wide receivers. I'm not making an excuse, but I'm trying to make people realize that the Clemson performance you saw on Saturday is not the Clemson performance you're going to see down the road. It's just not how it's going to work. You could think of your favorite team right now, okay? Whoever's out there listening, I know I only have like 10 listeners, but let's say this thing goes viral and I get a lot of people. Think of your favorite team. I want you to remove your starting quarterback, remove your starting middle linebacker, remove your favorite defensive end, and take your 4 cornerbacks, and one of them just came off an injury, so he's not up to game speed yet. One of them's out due to injury, and the other 2 have been banged up the entire year. And how do you think your team plays against a above average team? How do you think your team plays? Be honest now. Be honest. How do you think your team plays? Probably not that well. Probably loses a game. Maybe loses. Okay? That's just the reality. When you lose this many players and you lose the heart and soul of your team in Trevor Lawrence, now granted, DJ played great, but I mean, when you lose your leader, it's very difficult. Should this game have been close? Absolutely not. Should Clemson have come out and dominated? Yes. But people jumping ship and thinking Clemson's falling off the map and all this stuff is going downhill and the demise of Clemson is upon us, this is not the Clemson performance you're going to see down the line. That's just not what's going to happen. And I fully expect Clemson to beat Notre Dame, and I expect it to be a much better performance, at least, against Notre Dame on Saturday than we saw against Boston College. Now, speaking of Notre Dame, let's talk about Notre Dame for a second here. They had an impressive win. I cannot lie. I believe it was 31-13 over Georgia Tech. Game was a little tight early, but Notre Dame seemed to pull away. Come on here. There we go. Notre Dame seemed to pull away late, really dominated the game. Notre Dame's a good team. They're not ultra explosive on offense, but they're not bad on offense either. They're a team that if they really want to beat Clemson, they're going to need to hold the ball a lot. Low scoring game, 24-10 type, 24-17, maybe 17-10. But again, I'll talk about this ad nauseum in a separate podcast dedicated solely to that Clemson Notre Dame game. But overall, a good team win. Cannot fault them for anything. Came out, handled business. That's great. Now I'm going to talk about some fun stuff here. And for those of you who don't know, I am a student at the University of North Carolina. I have no ill will towards North Carolina. I hope North Carolina does incredibly well this year. I would love for the Tar Heels to do well, and I hope the Tar Heels do well. And I went to the Virginia Tech game, and I support the Tar Heels all the time because obviously I go to school in Chapel Hill. But this message that I'm about to say is dedicated to you, and trust me, you know who you are, or y'all know who you are, okay, that stood in my dorm room and told me that Carolina was losing at max one game this year, and there's so much talent, and there's so much to come, and Carolina's going to be unbelievable this year and invincible. And I said, look, I'm not going to disagree with you, but pump the brakes here. We're looking at a team that was 7-6 last year, had numerous losses that were iffy. And I said 7-4 is a very big possibility. And it may be even worse. Could Carolina go 10-1? Sure. Could Carolina go 9-2? Sure. But I'm telling you, 4 losses with how we know Carolina plays is in the realm of possibility. And what do you look here? A horrible loss to FSU and a awful loss to Virginia, who had one win at the time. Now, granted, I've seen Virginia play. Heck, Clemson played against Virginia. Virginia's not a bad team. Okay? They're certainly better than that one win. But they're not a good team by any stretch of the means. And they are not even close to a ranked team. And Carolina is significantly better on paper than Virginia in every way, shape, and form. There was no reason for Virginia to compete with North Carolina, much less beat North Carolina. And yet they do. The Tar Heels find another way to lose. And now you look at the remaining schedule. You got at Duke, home versus Wake, home versus Notre Dame, at Miami, and home against Western Carolina. So be honest with yourselves here, okay? Be honest with yourself. With how we've seen Carolina play and how up and down the Tar Heels have been, sure, we're probably going to beat Duke. I think Carolina dominates Duke. But look at the next 3 games. Home against Wake Forest, home against Notre Dame, at Miami. You really think now sit back and think about this. Do you honestly think Carolina walks out of that series 3-0? No. No chance. Best case scenario is 2-1. And in my liking, I think you could be looking at 1-2. I think Carolina will beat Wake Forest, but I think we'll lose to Notre Dame and Miami. I truly do think that. And that is not just me being biased against Carolina, but if you've watched Carolina this year, heck, 0-3 in that stretch is very possible. It's absolutely possible. I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves, that is 100% possible. With the ways Carolina plays this year and how the offense doesn't seem to wake up until the last minute and a half of the game, that's conceivable. So when I told you 4 losses was in the realm of possibility and y'all dismissed it as something idiotic, I'm reminding you that's what happened. That's what's going to happen. Now, is there a possibility Carolina goes 3-0 through this game and finishes with 2 losses and plays Clemson in the ACC Championship? Absolutely. There's a possibility of that. But is that likely? No. I told y'all that's the North Carolina team. I told y'all to be wary because that was coming. I knew it was coming. I knew Carolina was overrated from the very beginning. I tried to tell y'all, pump the brakes on North Carolina. 5's really darn high. And now you're looking at a loss to 1-4 Virginia, now 2-4 Virginia. And you have the meteor schedule coming up right now. And it doesn't look good. 4 losses in the realm of possibility. 3 losses at the worst or at the best. And as in come out of that stretch with 3 losses. And that's what I try to tell you. But that's fine. So in the ACC overall, there's a 3-legged race. You're going to have Clemson probably in the ACC championship or Notre Dame. And then you're going to have the loser of the Clemson or Notre Dame game. Or Miami. That's basically what you're going to have. So you're going to have the winner of Clemson Notre Dame versus the loser of Clemson Notre Dame or Miami. That's basically what you're going to have. Miami's not a bad team. Miami's one of those teams you never know what you're going to get week in and week out. And heck, they might lose to NC State on Friday. I would not be shocked to see it. That stuff happens. And so I'm not buying into Miami entirely yet, but North Carolina's pretty much out, in my estimation, for the ACC championship race. Moving on a little bit farther south, let's talk about Georgia. Again, this is another thing I tried to tell y'all in a couple of podcast episodes ago when I was talking about the Alabama-Georgia game and how great of a game it was, how big of a game it was. I said, look, Georgia may have lost a bigger thing than what they did on Saturday night. You may have seen the ceiling of Georgia with Stetson Bennett. And man, was I right. I mean, Stetson Bennett comes out, looks like he hasn't thrown a football before. He looks like he's 5'2", goes 9 of 13 for 131 yards and 2 interceptions. That type of quarterback play is not winning in the modern day college football. Plain, simple, and period. It's not. You need dynamic quarterback play. This is the exact reason why Nick Saban went after Tagovailoa. This is why Mac Jones is at quarterback, and this is why they recruited Bryce Young. These are all dynamic quarterbacks that can push the ball downfield, and not to mention Alabama has an unbelievable running game. This is why Clemson recruits DJ Uiagalelei. This is exactly why Clemson has Trevor Lawrence. This is why Ohio State has Justin Fields. Dynamic quarterback play wins in modern-day college football. Gone are the days where you can run the ball 60 times and rely on your defense to win 17-13, 17-10. Those days are over. Alabama's days from 2010 to 2014 are over. You can't run the ball all the time now and expect to get 21 points and sit on the lead. That's not how it plays. So Georgia has basically hit their ceiling with Stetson Bennett. I hope for the benevolency of Georgia that Kirby Smart moves off of Stetson Bennett, but I do not know if that will happen. And if it doesn't, Georgia's in for a long road because Georgia's going to be better. I think they're better than Florida. But they could very well lose to Florida. If you only put up 14 points, you're going to lose to Florida. It's very simple. Georgia, no matter how good their defense is, and Georgia's defense is really good. There's no doubt about that. But Florida's offense is also very good. And Pitt's the Trask to Pitts combo is one of the best in college football, with Pitts being an unbelievably good tight end. Georgia has got to play better, especially in the quarterback position, to beat Florida this weekend. And 14-3 ain't cutting it. And with the numerous losses that Florida has taken at the hands of Georgia in the past couple years, I would not be surprised if Dan Mullen comes out and just unloads everything on Georgia. Florida's going to give everything they have. And if Georgia doesn't upgrade in the quarterback position and maybe start JT Daniels, who, by the way, is a 5-star, or DeJuan Mathis, who was a 4-star, I mean, they got quarterback talent. You can't tell me the best Georgia has to offer at quarterback is a 5'10" walk-on who had 0 offers out of high school. You can't tell me that. But yet again, Kirby Smart screws up the quarterback race at Georgia, and it is costing them big time right now, as you can see. Alabama was another team with a solid win on Saturday, winning 41-0 over Mississippi State. That was a really solid win. You know, Mississippi State, after week 1, we thought they might be something, had the air raid in the SEC, and ever since that win against god-awful LSU, man, they've fallen off the map. But Alabama wins. Alabama might be the best team in the country. I would not be mad if you told me they were. In fact, I probably would agree with you. It would be them, in my opinion, it's them or Ohio State. And if you want to put Clemson up there, I got no problem with that either. But as far as what I've seen on field only, you've got to say Alabama or Ohio State. And Alabama's stupid good. They're going to be in the SEC championship game this year. And I think if Georgia runs into them again in Atlanta, I think it'll be a similar result. And I think if Florida runs into them this year in Atlanta, I think you'll have a similar deficit or a similar margin of victory, just with higher numbers. I think that both teams will score a little bit more than Alabama and Georgia would. But either way, I think Alabama's winning your SEC this year. I think Alabama's going to the playoff. And I truly do think you're headed for a collision of either a rematch of Alabama-Ohio State or Alabama-Clemson. And that's just how it is right now. Nick Saban's incredibly good. And Alabama will be good for as long as Nick Saban is there, and they may not fall off when Nick Saban retires. Keep that in mind too. There's a lot of coaches there that have been under him as Saban disciples, and they know what he teaches, and they know how he coaches, and they still might be good after he retires. But Alabama certainly with a good win there. LSU, terrible loss to Auburn, a bad Auburn team for that matter as well. And this one, the only reason why I included this, now granted, this was a inconsequential game, two unranked teams, blowout of epic proportions and all that. The only reason why I included this is LSU could very well be the worst defending national champion in history. I mean, goodness gracious. Talk about a one-hit wonder. And all these darn Cajun fans that were going after Clemson on Twitter, talking about how bad Clemson was, and LSU is built to last, and this program's here to stay, and all this, and diminishing what Clemson had accomplished over the years. This is how hard it is to win it consistently in college football. This is how hard it is to compete for national championships year in and year out. And this is why you see LSU falling off, because it's incredibly difficult to win year in and year out. And after Joe Burrow's gone, holy smokes. And let's not forget, Auburn is not a good team at all. They arguably should be 1-4 before this game was played. They had the refs botched that one call against Arkansas that won them the game. They botched another call against Ole Miss that won them the game there. Lost to South Carolina. All this, I mean, Auburn's not a good team, and yet LSU and their one-hit wonder mentality completely lays an egg against Auburn on Saturday. Now, moving up a little bit north, let's hit these couple ones, and then we'll be done here. I know we're breaching into the 22, 23-minute mark here, and I try to keep these things under 30 minutes, so let's see what we can do here. Ohio State could very well be the best team in the country, as I've mentioned numerous times, a dominating win over Penn State. Now, granted, there were no fans, and I know that takes a lot out of this stadium. Obviously, that would have been a whiteout, and Penn State's whiteout is one of the hardest venues to play or atmospheres to play in all of college football. Certainly one of the most tough to win. And you didn't have that, but still Ohio State goes into Penn State and completely handles business and dominates. And I'm telling you, they're really, really darn good. And I don't want to say that because I don't want to see Ohio State in the playoff. I want to see Alabama, Ohio State in the playoff much more than I want to see Clemson, Ohio State, or Clemson, Alabama. But golly, Ohio State is really, really good. And the biggest benefit for Ohio State is they have no one going to in their path to go to the playoff this year. I mean, they're just not going to play anyone. You look at the remaining schedule here. They got Rutgers, that's going to be a blowout. Then at Maryland, that'll be a blowout. Indiana, that'll be a blowout. Illinois, that'll be a blowout. Michigan State's awful. And then at the end of the year, you got their annual beating of Michigan. So they're not going to play anyone. They're going to absolutely dominate, and it's not going to be a challenge. The only hope that you have, if you're one of those people that doesn't want Ohio State to get in the playoff, the only hope you have is maybe they lose twice and they don't have Justin Fields either one of those games. And that's even with that's a 50-50 shot that they would even get left out. Obviously, you never want someone to get sick. You never want someone to get injured. But let's say randomly that Fields were to come down with the coronavirus and he's asymptomatic, perfectly fine, and Ohio State loses 2 games, that would be your only hope. for Ohio State and not getting to the playoff. I think they're on a straight collision course right now for the national championship, and regardless of who they play. And they are certainly very, very good this year. Now, moving on to a team that's not very good this year, and after week 1, everyone thought they would be good this year because, oh my gosh, they have a quarterback. Watch out, people. This year is finally the freaking year. And I told y'all, calm down. It's one game. It's just one game. And come to find out, that Minnesota team sucks. I mean, my gosh, Minnesota goes on the road and loses to Maryland and loses to Tagovailoa's little brother, who's a right-hand. How are you right-handed and your brother's left-handed? That's beyond the point. But hey, I told y'all, Michigan is not that good. They're not. And a horrible performance, a horrible loss to little brother Michigan State. I mean, I don't want to be too controversial in this episode, and I know I've already said some things that are going to ruffle some feathers and everything like that, but if you're Michigan, how long is the leash on Harbaugh? How long is it? I want you to be honest. He's now 1-6 at home against his rivals, Michigan State and Ohio State. If you're Michigan, the bare minimum, you have to beat Michigan State year in and year out. Especially in a year where there's coronavirus. They have a new coaching staff, weren't able to implement anything over the offseason, and lost to Rutgers week 1. Rutgers was one of the worst teams in the Power 5 for forever. Michigan State comes out there in week 1 and gets blown out by Rutgers, thoroughly handled, and week 2 turns around and beats you? Come on. And Milton didn't even have a bad game. He went 32 of 51 for 300. How does that happen? How do you lose to the worst case scenario for Michigan every single year? Even if all goes wrong, you have got to beat your in-state rival, Michigan State. You have to. Michigan is a better everything than Michigan State. In all academics, program, basketball. I mean, come on. You've got to beat Michigan State year in and year out. You don't have to beat Ohio State because Ohio State's unbelievable, okay? I can give you a pass on that. But you have to beat Michigan State. And yet again, they don't do it. So be honest. How long is the leash for Harbaugh? You can't lose to your rivals every single year and keep a job. It's just not the case. It about cost Dabo Swinney his job. If Dabo wasn't winning BCS games in the 2011, 2012, and 2013, he wouldn't have kept his job at Clemson. You can't lose to South Carolina that many years and keep your job. But the difference was Dabo was winning BCS games and all these great accomplishments over other SEC teams that obviously saved his job. And then we get Deshaun Watson, and now we're on a roll, not losing in the last 6 times to South Carolina. But that's a different story. But if you're Michigan, you've got to beat Michigan State. Harbaugh has got, I mean, come on. That's inexcusable. If everything goes wrong, you have to beat Michigan State. Michigan fails to do that. They're going to get blown out by Ohio State at the end of the year, no question. Heck, they might even lose to Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a pretty darn good team, especially if they have their quarterback back. And now Michigan's looking at maybe 6-2, 5-3. Just telling you, Harbaugh might not be a bad coach, X's and O's wise, but you can't lose these games. You can't lose the most important games of your season every single year and expect nothing to happen. It just that just can't be the way it is. You've got to win certain games. And the people in Michigan know that. The residents of Michigan want to see Michigan win. If you're a Michigan fan, there are certain games you have to win. And Harbaugh has not been successful in doing that during his time. Maybe that'll change. I don't know. I'm not from the future. But I'm just saying, it's time to be a little bit concerned if you're a Michigan fan. Because you would have thought by now Harbaugh would have turned this thing around and you'd be, I'm not saying he hasn't done anything positive in Michigan because he has. He has done a lot of things that were positive at Michigan. But you would think that he would be on a 5-6 game winning streak over Michigan State, especially with the turmoil that has happened in East Lansing over the recent history. So overall, just to round out this podcast, we talked about the ACC with Clemson, Notre Dame, and UNC. Then we drove into the SEC with Georgia, Alabama, and LSU, and all the crazy things that happened there. And then to round it off, we talked about the Big Ten, Ohio State, and Michigan there as well. As always, leave your suggestions of what you would like to see in the comments. I'll try to address those in the upcoming podcast episodes. If you disagreed with anything that I said today, please let me know, either in the comments below, or for those of you who know me, you can text me, call me. All is good to me. And we can certainly discuss it there. I will be making a separate podcast episode dedicated solely to the Clemson Notre Dame game this week. I look forward to doing so in that as well. And that should be good too. So if if y'all would like to see anything from these podcasts, please let me know. And I will see you back here whenever I make that Clemson Notre Dame podcast. And then obviously next Sunday to round out the next weekend of college football. Have a good one now.